Today's story is so emotionally heavy, it lingers long after the last word. Set beneath the endless skies of the Wild West, where love and injustice walk side by side. This is a place where silence can protect you, or destroy you, and where destiny waits patiently for the right moment to strike. It all starts with a simple reunion. One unexpected voice in a dusty town, small enough to seem harmless, yet strong enough to change everything. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Out here, the wind doesn't only push dust across the ground, it carries memory. And if you listen closely enough, you can still hear it, the echo of hooves, the murmur of names once spoken beneath the stars. Tarek had built his forge at the edge of a canyon, where the pine trees bowed under constant wind and fog drifted like smoke from an old, forgotten fire. Every morning before sunrise, he stirred the coals, letting their glow brush against his weathered face. The steady rhythm of hammer against iron was his prayer, his way of keeping silence from swallowing him whole. Years of solitude had shaped him, hands stained dark from metal and flame, eyes steady and patient like the land itself. Yet beneath that quiet strength lived a memory time had never burned away. He could still hear his mother's voice, Numa, soft, calm, and unyielding. Like wind through tall grass, she once told him, the land will always test your heart. But if it finds it true, it will give you something worth holding on to. She had passed many winters ago, leaving behind her words, a small silver bracelet, and the feeling that the earth itself was alive. Watching, weighing, waiting. Tarek never feared the quiet. The wide silence of the mesa was his closest companion. He hunted by moonlight, repaired his tools, and traded horseshoes with travelers who came down from the rim. He asked for little, and the land answered with just enough: meat for the fire, water for his forge, and space for his thoughts. But peace, as the old ones warned, is never sturdy. It breaks easily. That winter, the land had other plans. The first signs came with a restless wind, stronger than usual, as if trying to speak. The sky stayed gray for days, heavy with snow that refused to fall. Ravens circled low over the ridge, their calls sharp, uneasy. Tarek felt it deep inside. That pull the Apache call remembering. Something long buried was rising again. His thoughts drifted back to the years before silence took hold. Before the Dustfall folk learned to look past him as though he were part of the dirt itself. He remembered a girl who never turned away. Lenora. Back then, she had been laughter and sunlight, freckles dusted across her nose, her hair forever loosening in the wind. She was the only one who ever walked straight up to him, eyes bright, asking his name like she already knew it. For one summer, they were inseparable, building makeshift forts along the creek, trading secrets inside hollow logs, promising they would never forget one another, no matter where life carried them. But the frontier rarely keeps its promises. Her family moved east before the first snow fell that year, leaving nothing behind but the echo of her laughter in the trees. Tarek buried the memory beneath years of labor and dust, convincing himself it belonged to another life. Still, sometimes, between hammer strikes, he could see her face reflected in the forge fire, that same fearless smile cutting through his solitude. The storm arrived on a Tuesday night. The wind screamed down from the rim, rattling the pines and driving cold through every crack in his cabin. Tarek fed the fire, pulled his blanket tight, and listened to the howl outside. By morning, the snow had erased the world. The trail to town vanished. The creek lay frozen solid. When he stepped outside, his breath bloomed white in the air. The storm still echoed through the canyons when he noticed it, a shape near the tree line. At first he thought it was a deer or a lost animal, but as he moved closer, he saw pale blue fabric, torn and stiff with frost. A hand lay half buried in the drift. Tarek dropped to his knees. It was a woman. Cold, barely breathing. Her lips were blue, her hair tangled with ice. He lifted her carefully, feeling the storm's weight still clinging to her, and carried her inside, laying her beside the fire. When her face caught the light, his heart stopped. It was Lenora Pike, older now, yes, but unmistakable. The same eyes, the same small scar on her cheek from when she'd fallen off a pony as a child. The land had kept its promise. Tarek sat beside her all day, feeding the fire, waiting for warmth to return to her skin. He brushed frost from her hair, hearing Numa's voice again in his mind. The land will test your heart. He looked at the storm raging beyond the door and whispered, and if it finds it true, it gives you something worth keeping. Outside, the wind raged without end. Inside, the fire held steady. And beside him, the life he believed he had lost began to stir once more. That winter, the land returned to him, a woman he was never meant to forget, and a love powerful enough to change them both. While the storm roared through the night, Tarek's thoughts drifted back through the years to a time when the world was softer, when the distance between two hearts had not yet been carved by fear or division, and the space between two young hearts had not yet been carved by fear or difference. It was the summer of 1848. Tarek was 10 years old. He was small for his age, but there was already a watchfulness in him that made grown men uneasy. He lived with his mother, Numa, near the edge of the pine line, where a narrow creek slipped through the valley like a ribbon of silver. Numa called it the singing water, because you could hear it long before you ever laid eyes on it each morning. Tarek followed that sound down to the rocks, where trout hid beneath green moss, and sunlight shattered across the surface like broken glass. He liked to sit there without moving, listening, learning. His mother always said the woods had their own language. "And if you stay quiet long enough," she told him, "you'll hear what they're saying." One morning, when the air still smelled of wet earth and pine sap, Tarek heard something different. Not the stir of deer, not the call of a jay, but a splash, followed by a sharp, startled cry. He looked up. There, standing in the shallow creek, was a little girl. Her dress was soaked, her shoes gone, her hair tangled by the wind. She stared down at a book half submerged in the current, as if it had personally betrayed her. He had never seen her before. Her skin was pale, her braids coming loose, freckles scattered across her nose like sunspots. She scowled at the book, then snapped her head up. "Well," she said, "are you just going to stare, or are you going to help me?" Tarek blinked, caught between surprise and a laugh he didn't quite let out. Most children from town ran from him. This one didn't seem to notice what he was at all. He stepped into the water without a word, reached down, and pulled the book free. Its pages dripped, ink already bleeding into blue shadows. He handed it to her. She tilted her head, studying him. "You don't talk much, do you?" Tarek shrugged. "Well," she said, wringing out her dress, "I'm Lenora Pike. My pa says we're staying here until he finishes his timber survey." She smiled like the matter was settled. "Guess that makes us neighbors." The word neighbors felt heavy to him. Strange. New. They met nearly every day after that by the creek. Lenora brought biscuits from her mother's kitchen, sometimes a little jar of jam. Tarek shared the stories Numa had taught him, about the coyote who stole the sun, about the hawk that carried prayers into the sky. He showed her how to walk without spooking birds, how to read the print of deer in soft mud. She laughed at his patience, calling him old man, though he was barely older than she was. In return, she taught him how to whistle through a blade of grass and how to spell her name with pebbles along the sandbank. They were only children, two small souls on opposite sides of a world already full of rules about who should speak to whom. But in those woods, the rules didn't reach. Sometimes Lenora said things that made Tarek fall quiet, not because he disagreed, but because he didn't know how to answer. "I don't like how people in town talk about you," she said once, tossing stones into the water. He looked away. "It's fine. I'm used to it." "It's not fine," she snapped. "You didn't do anything wrong." He smiled then, a rare, quiet smile that flickered like sunlight through leaves. "Maybe not," he said softly. "But sometimes being born in the wrong skin is enough." Lenora frowned, her young mind struggling against a world that made no sense to her. After a long moment, she said, "Well, if they don't see you, I do." And to Tarek, that was everything. Those words settled in his chest like a fire that didn't burn, only warmed. As the weeks passed, the land changed with them. Wildflowers climbed the ridge. The air grew thick with pine resin. They built small forts from sticks and stones, calling them their kingdom. When the afternoon sun struck the creek just right, Lenora said it looked like heaven had spilled its light. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the rim, she sat beside him on their flat rock above the stream. Her legs dangled over the water. Cicadas sang. The air shimmered gold. "When I grow up," she said, chewing the end of a blade of grass, "I'm going to have a house with blue shutters, not white, blue, and I'll plant roses." She smiled to herself. "I'll have a dog named Jasper, and maybe a fiddle. I'll play it every night until the stars come out." Tarek frowned slightly. "What's a fiddle?" She laughed so hard she nearly fell back into the creek. "You've never heard a fiddle? Tarek, you've got so much to learn." He didn't answer, but in his silence lived a promise. Whatever world she dreamed of, he would carry it with him like a secret treasure, one he alone could protect. The summer didn't last, and childhood lasted even less. The day she left came without warning. He waited for her at their rock from sunrise until the shadows stretched long. When she didn't come, he followed the trail down to her family's cabin. The garden was overgrown. The door stood open. Only the echo of empty rooms greeted him. A neighbor woman told him they'd gone east. Everett Pike's debts too heavy, his pride too thin to stay. No goodbyes. Just gone. Tarek stood in the dust as the last light faded. The world that once felt endless suddenly hollow. That night, he sat by the fire beside Numa, who watched him in silence. "The world," she said gently, "is not kind to wandering hearts. But if a piece of your heart is still out there," Numa told him, "it will find its way back to you one day." Tarek nodded, unable to answer. Sleep took him not long after. Before it did, he reached into his pocket and drew out a small sparrow carved from driftwood, something Lenora Pike had shaped for him with her own hands. Its edges were rough, its wings uneven. To anyone else, it might have looked unfinished. To him, it was perfect. He wrapped the sparrow in deer hide and tucked it beneath a loose floorboard near the hearth, a secret he would carry into manhood. Long after his hands hardened into a blacksmith's hands, long after his voice learned the comfort of silence. That sparrow waited, just as he did. They couldn't have known it then, but the bond formed during that single summer would become the one thing neither time nor fear could break. The morning after Lenora's family left, the world felt altered. Even the creek beside the pines seemed quieter, as if it too had lost someone it loved. Tarek walked down to the whitewashed cabin near the bend. The door swung open in the wind. The garden lay neglected. The fence leaned as though tired. He sat on the old porch step, staring at footprints still pressed into the dust. Hers, smaller than his hand, already softening under sun and time. He kept believing he would see her again, riding back in her father's wagon, her laughter cutting through the stillness. But the days stretched on, and each afternoon, when the sun slipped behind the ridge, the road stayed empty. He climbed the rock by the creek where they once sat together. Sometimes he spoke her name into the wind, quietly, afraid it might sound foolish if anyone heard. Other times, he said nothing at all, only watched the light drain from the valley until shadow claimed it. At night, he took out the driftwood sparrow. Its wings were uneven, but full of meaning. He traced its rough surface with his thumb until sleep found him. Then, one evening, he wrapped it again in deer hide and hid it beneath the floorboard near the hearth. Numa noticed the change in him, how he stopped whistling, how his eyes searched the tree line whenever travelers passed. But she said nothing. She understood that grief didn't always come from death. Sometimes it came from distance. "Let it rest, son," she said softly once. "The world will give her back if it's meant to." Tarek nodded. But inside, he wasn't certain the world gave anything back, not to people like them. Years unfolded like slow pages in a book no one else was reading. Seasons passed, each leaving its mark on a boy learning to live without the sound of her voice. When he turned 15, the first true winter storm struck the rim, splitting trees and burying trails. Numa fell ill that year, coughing through nights that felt endless. Tarek chopped wood until his hands bled. He fed the fire. He prayed in both English and Apache. By spring thaw, she was gone. He buried her beneath the pines where wildflowers bloomed in April, marking the grave with stones and a single feather. When he returned to the cabin alone, the silence weighed heavier than before, something even the wind could not lift. At 17, he left the ridge for the first time, taking work at a logging camp miles away. Among men as rough as the land, he learned to swing an axe, shoe a horse, and keep his mouth shut. His hands grew strong, his shoulders broadened, his words grew scarce. Some men called him half-breed, others called him ghost boy. A few laughed when he stayed silent. They stopped laughing once they saw his eyes. Tarek didn't fight unless forced. But when he did, it was quick, silent, final. He moved from camp to camp, earning little more than food and shelter. The years hardened him, but did not make him cruel. Somewhere beneath the calloused skin and quiet habits, the boy who once carved dreams beside a creek still lived. He found peace in the rhythm of labor, the ring of hammer on iron, the scent of pine smoke, the patience of a horse learning trust. Every sound in the wilderness spoke to him, and though he lived mostly among strangers, he never forgot the way Lenora once said, "If they don't see you, I do." On long nights beneath a cloudless sky, he took out a scrap of deer hide from his pack, not the one hiding the sparrow, and rubbed it between his fingers like prayer beads. He didn't pray for her return. He prayed that the memory would not fade. By the time he reached 27, the Dustfall folk knew him as the quiet Apache Smith. His forge stood near the rim, the same land that raised him, the same land that took everything he had ever loved. People came when they needed something made right, a horseshoe that wouldn't crack, a hinge that wouldn't rust, a blade fit to survive winter. Tarek was good at fixing things. Everything, except himself. At night, when the forge fire collapsed into embers and the glow finally faded, Tarek would sit in the doorway. His eyes stayed fixed on the dark line of the horizon, while coyotes cried somewhere beyond the hills, lonely and untamed. He often wondered if Lenora Pike ever thought about the boy she once knew, the one who pulled her book from the creek, the one who learned how to turn silence into memory. He told himself she had forgotten him, that she was somewhere far east now, maybe married, maybe content, living inside a house with blue shutters just like she once dreamed. Yet sometimes, when the wind rolled down from the rim carrying the scent of river mud and juniper, he could almost hear her laughter. It came to him like a tune from another life. Whether it was sound or memory that carried him through the hardest years, he didn't yet know. What he didn't know was that the land had been watching all along, listening, measuring the truth of his heart, just as Numa once said it would. Because what belongs to you, the old ones say, is never truly lost. It only waits, quietly, until the right season returns. Somewhere beyond the horizon, past the dust and the years of silence, that season was moving back toward him. 17 winters had passed since Tarek last saw her. The world had changed. So had he. The boy who once waited beside the creek had become a man shaped by labor and solitude. His shoulders were broad from years of work, his face darkened and lined by sun and wind. The steady ring of iron on iron had replaced the ache of loneliness. Silence no longer hurt. It lived inside him like an old, familiar companion. That summer, the sky above the Arizona rim burned white with heat. Dust clung to everything, horses, roads, even memory. Tarek rode into Dust Creek for supplies. Flour, nails, coffee. Nothing more. He avoided town unless he had no choice. Men nodded to him politely, but their eyes followed him from corners and doorways. To them, he was useful, not welcome. He tied his horse outside the general store and ducked inside. The bell overhead chimed, soft, hollow. The air smelled of coffee beans, kerosene, and wood soap. Tobias Rendell, spectacles fogged and head lowered, barely glanced up. Tarek gathered what he needed quickly, moving like a man who knew better than to linger. He set his items on the counter, ready to pay and leave. Then he heard it, a voice behind him. Clear, steady, carrying that same gentle rise that once made the whole world feel lighter. "Excuse me, sir. Would you mind passing me that spool of blue thread?" Tarek froze. The air left his lungs. He turned slowly, as if afraid the sound would vanish if he moved too fast. She stood a few steps away, sunlight spilling in behind her through the open door. Lenora Pike. Not the barefoot girl from the creek, but a woman now. Graceful, composed, tired around the eyes. Her hair, still the color of wheat, was braided neatly beneath a straw bonnet. The freckles he remembered had faded into pale shadows. Her hands, once stained with creek mud, now showed the fine lines of a careful life. Perhaps too careful. She looked at him and gasped, the blue thread slipping forgotten from her fingers. Tarek. For a heartbeat, 17 years folded into nothing. The store, the dust, the distance, all of it disappeared. He could only whisper her name. A breathless smile spread across her face, the same smile he had carried like a flame in his chest all those years. "I knew it," she said softly. "I knew the moment I saw your shoulders. No one else stands like that." He didn't know how to answer. Words had never been his strength, and now they scattered like startled birds. He nodded once, a quiet, reverent motion, as though speech might shatter the moment. Sensing something private, Tobias Rendell turned away and busied himself with the scale. Lenora stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. "You haven't changed as much as I thought," she whispered. "Older, yes, harder, maybe, but still you." Tarek lowered his gaze, a faint smile touching his mouth. "And you," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "You became everything you dreamed of." She tilted her head. "Not everything. No blue shutters, no dog named Jasper, and the fiddle never happened." Her laugh was soft, but there was sadness in it, something he hadn't heard before. When he stayed silent, she filled the space with the truth she had been holding. "I teach now," she said, "at the small schoolhouse near the church. The children needed someone to teach them letters and numbers, and I needed a reason to stay busy." He nodded. "It suits you." She hesitated, her voice dropping. "There's something else. You'll hear it soon enough, so I'd rather you hear it from me." He waited, still as stone. "I'm engaged," she said at last. "His name is Von Kessler." The name settled heavily between them. "He owns the largest ranch on this side of the valley." Tarek said nothing, but the pain flickering in his eyes spoke clearly enough. Lenora continued, as though explaining it to herself. "When my father fell ill and the debts came due, Vaughn stepped in. He paid what we couldn't. He offered security, respect." She swallowed. "My parents said it was the only sensible choice." "Do you love him?" Tarek asked quietly. Her breath caught. She looked away before answering. "Love is a luxury," she said. "Not everyone gets to choose it." His jaw tightened as the old ache returned. That feeling of standing just outside a world he could see but never enter. They left the store together and walked down the main street in silence. The sun pressed hard against the dirt road. Wagons creaked. The Dustfall folk glanced their way, some curious, some openly disapproving. They stopped near the edge of town, by a fence where the creek slid quietly behind the sycamores. For a moment, it felt like stepping backward through time. Lenora turned to him, her voice trembling. "I thought time would dull what I felt. But seeing you now, it's like the years never happened." Tarek looked at her. He said nothing, but his silence carried a truth she could feel. Time had not changed the way Tarek saw her. It never could. The church bell rang somewhere in the distance, its sound pulling Lenora Pike back toward the life already tightening around her. She lifted her bonnet, slipped it into place, and took a small step away from him. "I have to go," she whispered. Then, softer, "But Tarek, don't disappear this time. Please." Her fingers brushed his, just a single heartbeat of warmth. Trembling. Real. Then she turned and walked off, her figure dissolving into the bright, dusty light of the street. Tarek remained where he stood long after she was gone, her voice echoing through the canyon of his memory like a lingering ghost. The boy who once hid a carved sparrow beneath a floorboard now carried something heavier. The knowledge that the girl he had loved in silence was promised to another man. Yet as he looked toward the distant rim, its cliffs sharp and eternal, something stirred deep inside him. The land had returned her for a reason. Fate, he believed, would not go to such lengths only to steal her away again. For days afterward, Tarek tried to bury the sound of Lenora's voice, but it clung to him like the smell of rain before a storm. He told himself it was enough to know she was alive, enough to see her once and leave the past where it belonged. But the heart doesn't listen to reason. It answers something older, deeper, the pull of what once felt true. And so his thoughts kept circling back to her, again and again, like hawks spiraling above water before the dive. He stayed quiet at the forge, working longer hours, pretending the steady rhythm of hammer and flame could drown everything else. But Dust Creek was a small town, and small towns have a talent for carrying secrets. It didn't take long before he heard the name Von Kessler spoken more than once. People talked about him the way they talked about weather. Powerful, unpredictable, a man of wealth, generous to the church, polite to strangers. He owned half the valley's grazing land, and most of the men in town owed him something: money, work, or silence. But in the darker corners of the saloon, after a few drinks loosened tongues, the stories shifted. A ranch hand mentioned a first wife back east. Beautiful. Gone too soon. Some said she took her own life. Others said she hadn't. One man leaned over his whiskey and whispered, "The doctor found bruises. Old ones." He lowered his voice further. "But nobody says it out loud, not when the man who caused them owns the sheriff's mortgage." Tarek listened without speaking. Inside him, something slow and deliberate began to form. Quiet, patient, dangerous. Later that week, he saw Von Kessler for the first time. It was evening. The sun spilled gold across the storefront windows. Von stood outside the saloon, laughing with two other ranchers, his voice loud and certain. He was taller than most, broad across the shoulders, dressed in fine clothes that didn't belong to western dust. His beard was neatly trimmed, his boots polished bright enough to catch the light. But it was his eyes that revealed him. Cold, narrow, always moving, always measuring. Tarek knew that kind of man. The sort who smiled wide in daylight and made others bleed in the dark. That night, fate placed Tarek in the wrong place, or perhaps the only place he needed to be. He stopped by the general store to collect a shipment of nails, but Tobias Rendell wasn't there. The back door stood cracked open. Voices drifted from the alley behind the building. He recognized one immediately. Everett Pike. His tone was tired, apologetic. The other voice belonged to Vaughn. Smooth, slick, dangerous. "You've had 2 months, Vaughn said calmly. 2 months past the note's due. I don't lend money out of charity." "I just need more time," Everett pleaded. "The crops failed, and Lenora—" "Lenora," Vaughn cut in. "Your daughter will be my wife soon." "You think I'd let my future father-in-law fall apart?" Vaughn continued. "I'm offering dignity, not ruin. You should be grateful." "I am," Everett said quietly. "But please, no more threats. She isn't ready." "The wedding happens when I decide," Vaughn snapped. His charm dropped away, revealing the steel beneath. "A man doesn't rescue a family just to have the bride wander off on her own whims." A dull thud followed, the sound of Vaughn's hand striking the wall. Silence. Then Vaughn spoke again, lower now, controlled. "You'll remind her what she owes. Debts aren't just numbers." Holloway. "Promises." Tarek's hands curled into fists. He slipped back into the shadows as Von Kessler walked away, his coat flaring behind him, polished boots cutting deep lines into the dirt. That night, Tarek didn't sleep. He sat awake, watching the forge fire sink into embers, his thoughts turning over what he had heard. Lenora wasn't simply marrying a man she didn't love. She was being claimed by a man who believed he already owned her. The following evening, when the sky burned copper and the first stars pricked through the dark, Tarek rode down to the creek, the same water where their childhood had begun. And she was there, as if the land itself had pulled them together once more. Lenora stood at the edge of the stream, her reflection trembling in the current. Somewhere in town, the faint sound of a piano drifted through the air. When she saw him, her breath caught. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "If Vaughn finds out, I already know what kind of man he is," Tarek cut in, his voice steady, though every word scorched his chest. "I heard him tonight, threatening your father, reminding him who holds the papers." "He won't stop, Lenora," he said quietly. Men like him don't know how." Her eyes filled. She looked down, twisting her fingers in her skirt. "I know," she whispered. "Last week he grabbed my father by the coat, told him I was his investment." She swallowed, fighting the shake in her voice. "I wanted to run, Tarek. God knows I did. But if I leave, my parents lose everything. He'll take the land, the house, every note we signed." She shook her head. "My mother is too frail to travel, and my father would never survive the shame." Tarek stepped closer, the creek murmuring between them. "Freedom bought with kindness is still freedom," he said softly. "Let me help you breathe again." She looked up at him, eyes wide, her face pale in the fading light. "How?" she asked. "You can't fight him. Not the way he fights." "I don't need to fight," Tarek replied. "I only need to do what's right." For a moment, the air held still. Every part of her wanted to believe him. He offered her safety without needing to speak it aloud. But fear is a chain that doesn't break easily. "If I leave with you," she whispered, "they'll call it kidnapping. An Apache stealing a white woman. They'll hang you before dawn." He didn't argue. He knew she was right. But he also knew he couldn't walk away again. Before either of them could speak further, the brush behind them shifted. Footsteps. A lantern's glow cut through the trees. Von Kessler emerged from the darkness, tall, composed, wearing a smile that made the skin crawl. "Well," he said smoothly, "isn't this a charming sight? Miss Pike and the blacksmith, keeping late company." Lenora stepped back, her lips trembling. "Vaughn, this isn't—" "Save it," he snapped. The charm vanished, leaving steel behind. "You will not ruin yourself with whispers and shadows." He straightened. "The banns are posted tomorrow. 2 weeks from now you will be my wife. Until then, you will remain in your father's house. Do you understand?" She nodded faintly, eyes fixed on the ground. Then Vaughn turned his gaze to Tarek. "And as for you," he said, each word dripping poison, "I'll say this only once. Stay away. Dust Creek has no place for your kind meddling in respectable affairs." Tarek met his stare, silent, unmoving. For a long, dangerous moment, neither man looked away. Then Vaughn smirked, turned on his heel, and took Lenora by the arm. Not roughly, but firmly enough to remind them both who held power. Tarek stayed by the creek long after they vanished. The wind slid through the trees like a warning. But his heart had already chosen. He lifted his gaze toward the ridge, toward the place where the old sparrow still slept beneath the floorboard of his cabin. A promise once made, now awake again. And this time, he intended to keep it. In the days that followed, Tarek could no longer stand still. He worked through daylight, but his thoughts circled Lenora. Her fear, the quiet desperation in her eyes beside the creek. He had lived his life enduring indifference. This was something else. This was injustice with a name. And a face. Each night, he lay awake beside the dying forge fire, hearing her words echo in his mind. "If I leave, they'll hang you." He didn't fear death. He feared doing nothing. By the end of the week, his decision was set. He began with his horses, his only companions through years of silence. At sunrise, he led them to the trading post and sold them for less than half their worth. The trader counted the coins without meeting his eyes, pretending not to understand what that sale truly meant. Then came his tools, the hammer, the tongs, the anvil he had carried from camp to camp. One by one, the pieces of his life passed into strangers' hands. Finally, from a small wooden box, he took out the last thing Numa had left him. A silver bracelet etched with a hawk in flight. She had worn it every day of her life. When she died, she told him, "Keep this, my son, for the day your heart finds its reason to stay." That day had come. Tarek carried it into town and laid it on the counter of Wilmer Gage, the lawyer who kept Von Kessler's ledgers. The man's spectacles slid down his nose as he looked up. "Mr. Gray," he spoke with care, "I trust you understand the size of the debt involved. The Pikes owe more than most men earn in 10 years. Tarek nodded once, steady and unflinching. "Then this will be a beginning," he said. "I'll cover the rest with what's owed to me from the ranch and the forge. Every coin, every tool." He met the lawyer's eyes. "I want their papers cleared." Wilmer Gage frowned. "Vaughn won't take kindly to that." "I'm not concerned with what Vaughn takes kindly to," Tarek replied. "I'm asking for what's fair, by dusk." The documents were signed. The Pike land, the cabin, every note of debt. Paid in full. No one in Dust Creek knew what the Apache blacksmith had done. He didn't tell them. He simply walked home beneath a blood-red sky, his wrist bare where his mother's bracelet had once rested, the weight of Numa's absence heavier than ever. 2 days later, Lenora Pike learned the truth. She came to the forge at twilight, breathless, eyes wide. "Tarek," she said, her voice shaking. "My father, he came home with papers from Mr. Gage. The debt, it's gone." Her voice broke on the last word. "He says we're free." She searched his face. "Was it you?" Tarek lifted his eyes from the fire. Its glow traced the calm resolve set behind them. "I did what needed doing," he said quietly. Her breath caught. "You sold everything. Your tools, your horses." Then her gaze dropped, her eyes shining. "Even your mother's bracelet." He nodded. Tears filled her eyes. "You gave up your life for mine." Tarek stepped closer, shaking his head. "No," he said softly. "I gave up loneliness." The air between them went still. Outside, the wind carried the distant cry of coyotes across the valley. For one heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. But freedom taken from men like Von Kessler never came without a cost. By morning, the truth raced through Dust Creek like fire through dry grass. Vaughn had discovered everything. They said he stormed into Wilmer Gage's office, demanding answers, his voice echoing down Main Street. When he learned the debt had been paid, legally, cleanly, his rage shook the walls. Witnesses later told how he shattered a glass against the door, screaming Tarek's name, calling him a thief, a liar, a half-breed snake who'd stolen what was rightfully his. But the law was unyielding. The papers were sealed. And even Von Kessler couldn't undo ink that had already dried. Still, men like him didn't rely on law to mend wounded pride. That evening, the saloon buzzed with whispers, how Vaughn had been seen sharpening a knife at the bar, how his foreman rode out of town carrying a rifle wrapped in canvas. No one said the name aloud, but everyone knew who it was meant for. Tarek heard the murmurs and didn't flinch. He kept working, setting a wagon wheel straight until the last light faded. Then he banked the forge and stepped beneath the stars. He looked toward the ridge where the Pike cabin stood and felt something unfamiliar, something close to peace. Lenora's family was safe. Her father would sleep without fear. Her mother could breathe again. He had given up everything for that, and he would do it again. Because love, to him, had never been about possession. It had always been about protection. Even so, he knew the storm wasn't finished. A man like Von Kessler would never accept defeat quietly. Pride had its own hunger, and once wounded, it devoured reason. As Tarek walked home across open fields, night closed in around him. Pines whispered overhead. Stars shimmered like sparks from a long, cold forge. He remembered Numa's words. "If the land finds your heart true, It will give you something worth keeping. He had found it, and he had paid the price. Behind him, in the dark heart of town, a distant rumble rolled. Not thunder. Von Kessler's fury, gathering like a storm, promising that peace was only the stillness before the next strike. Tarek looked up at the rim, jagged, eternal, unyielding, and whispered to the wind, "Let it come. I've nothing left to lose, except what's worth fighting for." Far beyond the hills, fate stirred again, waiting to collect its debt. The days that followed were thick with silence, the kind that hangs just before a storm breaks. Dust Creek held its breath. Von Kessler, the man who once ruled the valley with a handshake and a threat, was unraveling. His temper spilled through town like kerosene. Men who once drank at his table crossed the street to avoid him. Women whispered his name like it carried bad luck. Even Sheriff Orlin Hatch, who owed Vaughn more favors than he cared to count, began keeping his distance. But storms don't start with thunder. They begin with a shift in the air. It came in the form of a stranger, a federal investigator named Franklin Shaw. Shaw rode into town carrying a leather satchel thick with papers and warrants. He had the calm of a man who'd seen too much, and the patience of someone who already knew how the story would end. Within a day, his presence stirred the town like a stick through muddy water. He asked about freight wagons that vanished, about deeds that didn't align, about widows who lost land to clerical errors. Every trail, every whisper, led back to Von Kessler. The walls began to crack. A split-rail man confessed to burning wagons for insurance money. A banker produced false ledgers bearing Vaughn's signature. Even the sheriff, cornered by truth, admitted he'd been paid to look away. It was as if the town had been waiting for permission to speak. And when that permission came, the truth poured out like rain. But the voice that stilled every room belonged to Lenora Pike. When Franklin Shaw called her to testify, the air changed. The courthouse was packed. People came from miles away, drawn by the same dark curiosity that once fueled whispers about her engagement. But when Lenora Pike stepped forward, trembling, pale yet unbroken, the murmurs fell away. Her hands shook as she rested them on the Bible. When her voice came, it was quiet but steady. She told them everything. How Von Kessler had purchased her father's debts, then demanded her hand as payment. How he seized Everett Pike by the coat when the old man hesitated. How he spoke of her not as a woman, but as property, something owned, something traded. The room grew so still that the first taps of rain against the windows could be heard. She faltered once, her composure cracking beneath the weight of memory. Her eyes searched the crowd. At the very back of the room stood Tarek. He did not speak. He did not move. But his presence anchored her, as it always had. Lenora lifted her chin, drew in a steady breath, and finished. Each word struck like hammer on anvil, clean, deliberate, impossible to deny. By the time she stepped down, even the judge's expression had softened. Franklin Shaw closed his folder with finality. The outcome was unavoidable. Von Kessler, the man who once ruled half the valley, was led out in irons as the storm outside broke open fully. Thunder split the sky. Lightning tore through the clouds. Rain slammed against the courthouse windows like the sound of long-delayed justice. As deputies dragged him towards the wagon, Vaughn shouted curses into the downpour. "You'll regret this, every last one of you." The wind swallowed his words. Tarek watched from the courthouse steps, rain soaking through his shirt, his face unreadable. He felt no triumph, only release, the kind that comes when the land itself finally exhales after holding its breath too long. Some storms cleanse. Others reveal what's been buried beneath the surface all along. When the rain eased, Dust Creek stood changed. The dust was gone. The air smelled of iron and pine. For the first time in years, the town felt honest. Tarek turned from the courthouse and looked toward the distant hills. The clouds were breaking, sunlight spilling through their seams like mercy. The storm had taken much, but it had given something back. Truth. And with truth, the chance to begin again. Months passed. The storm faded, leaving the land washed clean and renewed. Dust Creek moved forward, quieter now, as if the town itself wanted to forget the sound of its own cruelty. Von Kessler's name became something spoken in low voices, a warning of what happens when power grows without restraint. His estate was sold to settle the debts that built his empire. And in the clearing away, something rare took root. Peace. Tarek did not stay to watch the town remake itself. He had never truly belonged there. Instead, he rode north toward the high meadow, where Numa once gathered herbs and whispered prayers into the wind. There, he began again. He purchased an old hunting lodge, small, weathered but sound. The air was sharp. The creek ran clear. Mountains framed the horizon like guardians of a private world. In time, Lenora joined him. She arrived at sunrise, her hair loose, her face marked by travel and resolve. Her parents had urged her to remain in town, to rebuild where life might be easier. But Lenora had lived under other people's rules long enough. "I've been safe," she said. "But I haven't been alive. Not until now." Together they repaired the roof, patched the walls, and built a porch that faced the setting sun. She painted the shutters blue, the same shade she had dreamed of as a child. When the paint dried beneath her hands, she smiled through tears. "Blue," she whispered, "just like I promised." Tarek watched her in silence. He had spent most of his life fixing broken things, tools, wagons, fences. But standing there, her laughter lifting into the mountain air, he realized he had been repairing himself as well. Their love did not shout to be noticed. It moved quietly, like steady water finding its way through stone, patient as the turning seasons. One evening, beneath a sky streaked with crimson and gold, Lenora stood outside the cabin, her shawl drawn close, the air scented with pine and smoke. She turned to him and said softly, "I've been thinking, Tarek, about vows." He smiled faintly. "We don't have a preacher." "We don't need one," she replied. "We never did." And so they stood there, just the two of them, surrounded by the wild. Beneath a sky broad enough to hold everything they had survived, there were no papers, no witnesses, no law beyond love itself. Tarek took her hands in his. "I take you," he said, his voice low, steady, and solemn, "for all the days the rim will grant us." Lenora Pike's eyes shone like the first stars rising above the ridge. "And I take you," she whispered, "for all the nights the stars keep burning." The wind slipped through the tall grass, carrying their words across the valley. Somewhere above them, a hawk cried, circling the same open sky that had once watched them as children playing along the creek. In that moment, the past no longer weighed anything. Not the years of silence, not the cruelty, not the losses. What mattered was this: they had found their way back to one another, not by accident, but by choice. As months turned into seasons, their life settled into quiet, graceful patterns. The garden thrived beneath Lenora's careful hands. Tarek built a small corral for the horses. In the evenings, they sat side by side on the porch, words unnecessary. The wind and the creek spoke enough for them. On clear nights, Lenora would take out the small wooden sparrow she had once found beneath the lodge floorboards, the one she carved for him long ago. Its wings were smoothed by time, its color faded, but she kept it near the hearth, where firelight gave it warmth again. Tarek would smile and say, "Still sings." She would answer, "Always will." The desert remembers every promise, but it also forgives. And sometimes, when two hearts choose each other despite the noise of the world, that choice is enough to call a place home. The story of Tarek and Lenora Pike became one of those quiet truths the land keeps close, not written in books, but carried in wind and dust and memory, in places that once knew love. If you were to walk that meadow today, you'd still find traces of their life. The blue shutters softened by sun, a wooden sparrow resting on the porch, and laughter lingering faintly in the breeze. Out here, beneath the endless western sky, time does not erase such things. It carries them gently, patiently, like a song the land refuses to forget. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for giving your time to this story. Some journeys shape us, and we hope this one left a mark on your heart. There are more paths ahead, more legends of love, hardship, and redemption beneath the western sky. Please subscribe, leave your thoughts, and travel with us once again. Thank you, and God bless. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. The stories presented here are creative expressions and may mix historical inspiration with dramatized scenes. AI tools contribute to some elements of voice, imagery, and structure, but every published story is refined by editors and creators to ensure authentic emotional impact. We honor YouTube's policies and do not generate deceptive likenesses or artificial depictions of real people. All audiovisual components are legally licensed. Any use, redistribution, or alteration of this content must be granted through written consent. Your presence here means a lot. Thank you for supporting artistic storytelling.